Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Reason, the show where we reason rightly. This is our final episode with Dr. Charles Rice for this season. Doctor, how are you?
Michael, good.
Professor Emeritus, University of Notre Dame Law School.
Right.
Brilliant, scholar, enlightened, tremendous. Should have Emmys. Should be the dean. Should be the president of Notre Dame.
Keep going.
Really,
I'd have to be.
But president of the United States. Believe me, he should be the president of the United States.
I couldn't take the cut and pay. Right.
This whole season we've been talking about the Summa Theologica, and which we have right here, all five. Well, this particular printed edition has 5 volumes. By St. Thomas Aquinas back in the 13th century, where he addresses, because those truths are timeless and outside of, obviously outside of time, the problems of ignoring the truth of any humans in any particular epoch or era of history always kind of create the same consequences. Brokenness, divisiveness, that sort of thing. So, since truth is one, when Thomas talks about truth, he talks about not just truth, but everything that comes in with that. Unity, love, sacrifice, all the good things of humanity that we get from God. When just before Joseph Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, was elected to the papacy, he gave a talk back in 2005, right, where he talked about a dictatorship of relativism.
There's a homily at the Mass before the conclave.
That's right. Yeah. What do you think about, well, first of all, as we were talking just before the show, that particular phrase, a dictatorship of relativism, could be translated either as dictatorship or tyranny of relativism. And the word can be used either way.
Right.
What does he mean by a dictatorship of relativism, and what has that got to do with the Summa 800 years earlier?
Well, he meant by it a culture in which the individual and his whims, that was his expression, his whims, are the only measure, and that there are no acknowledged objective norms. And the point that he made there, he made in other places numerous times, that what we've done to reason, and reason is what St. Thomas is integrating with faith. Faith and reason are 2 ways of knowing the truth. And what then Cardinal Ratzinger said, and later on Pope Benedict, as Pope Benedict, he said, was that what the culture has done today is reduce reason to the merely empirical.
Yeah. So
that reason is incapable of knowing anything beyond the scientific calculations and the empirical demonstrations and so on. So reason can't know anything about God.
Yeah.
Right? Well, we've been talking for the past 13 weeks about how Thomas, demonstrates that we can know God. We can know a lot about God. And so when you have a culture where reason is limited to the empirical and therefore can't know anything about objective moral truth or about God, what's the consequence? One consequence immediately is that statements about God and about moral truth are regarded as non-rational.
Right.
This was the point that Benedict made at Regensburg. And because they're regarded as non-rational, they're therefore excluded from the public discourse.
Right.
That's why, it's...
Because they're viewed as nothing more than just your opinion.
Feelings.
Feelings, even.
Right. That's why it's totally politically incorrect.
Yeah.
To say that something is contrary to the will of God or unjust. So it involves a secularism where the individual is incapable of knowing about God, and it's a displacement of God. And incidentally, we'll get to that in a minute. But the second aspect of this dictatorship of relativism is relativism. That there is no objective, knowable truth. And of course, relativism is absurd.
Sure.
because if all things are relative, so is that statement.
Right.
But the payoff here
Says,
culturally,
build on that for 10 seconds.
well, it's true. I mean, if all things are relative, then your statement that all things are relative must itself be relative.
Right.
So it's not always true.
So to say all in any sentence means, well, you're appealing to some absolute.
Yeah. But the universities, as Alan Bloom has pointed out so well, are full of professors who are absolutely sure they can't be sure of anything, or if they're or if they're not sure about whether they can, they're sure that they're not sure.
Right.
All right, and the whole thing has a payoff in what the lawyers call legal positivism, which is the notion that since nobody can know objective truth, moral truth, as Hans Kelsen said, nobody can know what justice is.
Right.
And justice is an irrational ideal, he said.
Yep.
And he said, he was the leading legal positivist of the 20th century. He said that the only thing that's necessary to make a law valid is that it be enacted by the prescribed procedure and be effective. And he was an honest guy. After the war, he said that Auschwitz was valid law. Now, consider what Thomas is saying.
Yeah.
See, what Aquinas is telling us is he's connected with reality. And what he says is, wait a minute, a law is contrary to reason.
Right.
And God is reason, all right? Contrary to justice. It's not even a law,
Right.
right? And
If it violates the divine.
it's not even a law, and if the law purports to compel you to violate the divine law, you must disobey it.
Right.
But we're in a culture where there's no such thing as an unjust law, and whatever the state decrees is accepted, because if you say that law is unjust, you're just emoting, you see? And so it's secularism, relativism, and then individualism.
Yep.
The idea that I'm aboard, pull up the gangplank, that I have no relation to others, I am autonomous, I make up my own rules, all right? And the critical element there is conscience, where, as St. Thomas tells us, conscience is the act by which you judge, keyword judge, rightness or wrongness of an action. It's an act of the intellect.
Sure.
Influenced by emotion, sure.
Sure.
And by the will. But it's an act of judgment. It can be right or wrong. And the culture today, as John Paul has explained, the culture today, because of the relativism and the limitation of reason to merely the empirical and scientific, because reason can't reach objective moral truth.
Right.
The culture today regards conscience not as a judgment as to an objective moral right, but as merely a personal decision. I mean, who can say that my decision to have chocolate instead of vanilla is wrong?
Yeah.
You see? And so whatever you decide is right for you. And conscience, therefore, is not that important. It's trivialized. And Cardinal Ratzinger...
Yeah, it really comes in conscience in contemporary man. Really just comes down to, you could just substitute the word feelings for it.
But exactly.
How many times do you hear people say, I feel that's not right?
Oh, yeah. See, and conscience is your connection with God. Cardinal Newman, as a matter of fact, went so far as to say that your conscience is a proof of the existence of God.
Sure.
Interesting way
That's
he
what,
did it. He
that's a good way to
said that why do you feel shame at having done something wrong? Why do you feel troubled by that? And why do you feel such satisfaction when you do something right? And he attributed that to the reality that we know there is a Father. I mean, you said you wouldn't feel shame before a dog,
Right.
or before a stone. But the fact of conscience is an indication that there is an intelligent being out there to whom you are accountable. It's really a very interesting
Yeah, it's very
thing.
interesting
It's
thing.
not one of Thomas's proofs, but it's an interesting take on it.
It comes from the same vein.
Yes, and the key is that St. Thomas affirms that conscience is judgment, and our culture says no, it's just your own personal decision.
Right, right.
And since it is your own personal decision, what right do you have to claim a conscientious objection from the law?
Right.
And since nobody can know what's objectively right or wrong, there's no such thing as an unjust law.
I think something that's interesting, though, as we go through, this on an individual basis, is that there, on the basis of how an individual might think, there are forces, camps at work in society who, on the surface, subscribe to this. There is no right or wrong, just sort of do whatever you want. And they use that as kind of a marketing tool or a PR thing. They don't really believe that.
Right.
They want you to believe it.
Right.
But they absolutely have an agenda. Do not tell me that Planned Parenthood says, it's okay if you believe the child is the child in the womb is alive and a human being and has a right to live. They absolutely do not want you believing that, and they use taxpayer money and agendas and programs and conferences and everything else to crush that idea.
Right.
So this idea of there really is no absolute truth. The forces of evil absolutely believe in an absolute
You're
truth. It's
absolutely
just
right.
their truth.
No, you're right. Yeah, that's true. And interestingly, I mentioned Kelsen, Hans Kelsen. He wrote the Austrian Constitution in 1920 and all that. And he was an honest guy. After the war, he said that Auschwitz was right, and justice is an irrational ideal. He said that relativism is the philosophy of democracy.
Yeah.
All right? And he said it's the philosophy of democracy because if everybody agrees that nobody has the right answer, we'll all get together, Rodney King style, and get along. All right? And John Paul II and Benedict specifically took issue with this.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Sure.
And the point that each one made in different words was that, as John Paul said, relativism isn't the philosophy of democracy. It leads to totalitarianism. Why? Because, going back to what you just said, because he said if there's no common truth that you can reason about, what can you reason about?
Right.
He said what happens is that you then have a conflict of interests where each interest is opposing its own truth. And the point is not that nobody recognizes a truth. Each one has his own truth.
Right.
And you can't quarrel with that truth.
Right.
Because you can't say it's right or wrong. But that's their truth for them, all right? And they can impose it on you.
Absolutely.
It becomes a matter of power.
Yeah, this is the point that I think a lot of, oftentimes people who are good, faithful, God-fearing, Catholics will look out and say, well, you know what, we can't, they somehow have confused the idea in their head with meekness with being quiet and just, wishing these things weren't that way, but having to accept it. They seem to miss the point that there is an aggressive, offensive agenda out here that wants to impose its will. It does not believe there is no such thing as truth.
Right.
It thinks its truth is truth.
Right. Right.
And see those bumper stickers, coexist, and they have all the little signs of all different world religions. What if one of those religions, let's take Christianity out of it for a second. You couldn't spell coexist, I guess, without it. But what if one of those religions in this coexist thing said, our religion should dominate every other religion and exterminate them all? Okay. How do you have, back to the principle of non-contradiction, how do you propose logically that all of these religions should be allowed to exist when one of them claims that it needs to exterminate all the others?
Right.
But yet that's what's going on with all of these political agendas and social agendas and everything else.
Yeah.
So there's an inherent contradiction built into the idea. You can't have competing truths all
It's
saying
right.
the other truths are false.
That's exactly right. And that's where, we're wrapping up this thing on Aquinas, and that's what you get out of Aquinas, that there is a truth, and a truth that's accessible to reason and accessible to faith. Every page of the Summa is replete with biblical quotations as well as reason, so that the thing is an integration of faith and reason, and there is a truth. And the truth, of course, with a capital T, is Christ, because God is truth.
Right.
God is truth, not God is truthful. He is truth. All right? And the question then, what do you do with this coexist nonsense? Just speak the truth.
Sure.
Cardinal Gagno, we're running out of time, but Cardinal Gagno had when he was head of the Council of the Family,
Right.
he had a conversation with John Paul II, and he reported on it, and I have the text of it. He said, John Paul, the Pope told me, and this is a quote from the Pope that he gives, the Pope said, do not try to rebut the errors of all those who are wrong. He said, there are so many, it would never end.
Yeah.
He said, instead, teach the truth. Because if you teach the truth, a grace goes with it.
Yes.
And that person may not immediately relate to it, but when he needs it, that grace will be there. And if you don't speak the truth, no grace goes with it.
Right.
And that's what we should be drawing out of St. Thomas.
Exactly.
That he is an expositor of the truth which we find in Christ, and we find it through the magisterium of the Church. And it's about time we started
saying it.
Yeah, exactly.
Started saying it. I know we're just right on the verge of out of time. I just got to ask you one last final thing. You stand in front of 20-somethings, every year, every semester, saying all of this. They've come through a system, unfortunately, many times Catholic, but also, public school, where they've heard none of this.
Right.
At all, in churches, at home, in schools, with their friends, on TV, nowhere. When you say this kind of stuff to them, what do they say to you?
Well, in a way, since what I teach is not a required course, it's kind of a self-selecting thing. The people who take it kind of know what they're getting.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that this is a news flash to them.
Yeah.
When you get into something, the principle of non-contradiction is a news flash.
Yeah.
They know it in their heads, but
Right.
but they never thought about it.
Yeah.
And it's very attractive, the whole thing. Because Thomas is very attractive, because he does integrate faith and reason, and it's an opportunity for a person in college or law school or high school to be able to have that integration and carry it on in his own life. I mean, I got this stuff in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that
then
was
it
the norm.
stopped.
Yeah, and the Jesuit high school.
Yeah.
But that's the answer: speak the truth and trust God.
That's it. And as John Paul said many times, the truth is attractive in itself.
It is.
It really is. It really is. Dr.
Hey,
Rice,
Michael.
thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I was going to say our guest, but he's really kind of the host here.
Right.
I'm not exactly the guest, but whatever. He's the guy. We sit at Dr. Rice's feet and we hear truth.
Hey,
And
I'm leaving town. I can say whatever I want.
all right, so that wraps up season 2 of Right Reason. We'd like to thank you very much for for tuning in, and there's a little email button on there. You can just take any of these episodes and just send them out to anybody you want. If something if you're just having an argument or a discussion with someone, or find a little nugget in here, send it out to them. The whole point of this, as Dr. Rice has said, quoting the Pope, is just say the truth. Just say the truth. And that's what we are about as Catholics, and hopefully we'll all see each other in heaven. So, for the conclusion of this season, Michael Vorse from ChurchMilitant.tv, wrapping up with Dr. Charles Rice,
Thank you.
University of Notre Dame Law School, Professor Emeritus. God love you all.